What links Vladimir Putin and Russia to countries across Africa? It's an organisation that for years has been protecting leaders in armed conflicts in countries across the continent, gaining Russia access to natural resources like gold, oil and diamonds, and now fights for Russia in Ukraine. The Wagner Group. The same Wagner Group that just tried to march all the way to Moscow and remove Russia's military leaders. Spoiler alert, it failed, but more on that later. Before Russia invaded Ukraine, the Wagner Group was a shadowy organisation that we didn't know much about. Russia used to say it had nothing to do with the Wagner Group, and sometimes said it didn't exist. Since then, things have changed. The Wagner Group is a private army. Sometimes you'll hear it called a military contractor. Sometimes the troops might be referred to as mercenaries or paramilitaries. Russia's used the Wagner Group in its invasion of Ukraine, and the private army has been involved in some of the biggest battles of the war.
Everywhere that Wagner goes, they leave death and destruction in their wake.
We now know that Wagner was founded by Yevgeny Prigozhin, a Russian businessman who was known as Putin's chef because he owned fancy restaurants and organised catering events. But after months of criticising Russia's military leaders, Prigozhin moved his Wagner troops from Ukraine into Russia, seized a city, and began a march all the way to the capital Moscow to try and remove the defence leaders. But the rebellion failed, and Prigozhin is now exiled to the neighbouring country Belarus. Although Belarus's leader now says that Prigozhin is in Russia. And it's not clear what will happen to all those Wagner fighters. But what we do know is before Ukraine, Wagner was active for years in countries across Africa and the Middle East, and still operates there.
We have consistently condemned the Wagner Group, and we carefully monitor their actions in Ukraine and the wider world.
According to the Centre for Strategic and International Studies, the Wagner Group is active in around 30 countries. The Wagner Group itself says it's been active in African countries since 2018. Western countries have accused the Wagner Group of human rights abuses in countries like Libya and Mali. Estimates say that Wagner uses between a few hundred to 2,000 troops in a country where it's active. But what's Wagner doing in African countries? And what does Russia get out of it? Well, the Wagner Group basically does deals where it provides security for leaders of countries who often rule with absolute power, and basically helps keep them there. In return, Wagner often gets a share of that country's resources, like gold mining, or other stuff like oil, gas, and diamonds.
They hurt local populations, they extract minerals and extract money from the communities where they operate, and so we would continue to urge governments in Africa and elsewhere to cease any cooperation with Wagner.
Take Mali. It's a country in West Africa. Wagner sent more than 1,000 troops there to fight Islamic extremists. In 2021, it was reported that Wagner's contract with the Mali government was worth $10 million a month. Earlier this year, the US sanctioned the Wagner Group's leader in Mali, accusing Russia of trying to use the country as a way of getting weapons to troops in Ukraine. Mali says Wagner are there for training and nothing more. In the Central African Republic, Wagner helped keep the president there in power. It also guarded the country's gold and diamond mines. After the failed Wagner rebellion in Russia, the US sanctioned 2 mining companies in the CAR that were linked with one Yevgeny Prigozhin. Remember him? The boss of the Wagner Group. And that the mining companies were sanctioned for funding Wagner's activities in Africa and Ukraine. In places like Libya and Sudan, Wagner's been called in when those countries have asked Russia to help with armed conflicts. In Sudan, in northeast Africa, it meant a Russian mining firm could move in that's also responsible for a big chunk of Africa's gold production. The United States claims that the company is controlled by, you'll never guess, Yevgeny Prigozhin. For Russian President Vladimir Putin, the Wagner Group was a way of expanding Russia's influence around the world to countries that had poor relationships with Europe and the United States. In Mali, Wagner stepped in to replace French troops. For Russia, the money made from Wagner's activities helps fund the war in Ukraine. But what happens to the Wagner Group and its operations in African countries now that it's tried and failed to march on Moscow? Thousands of Wagner fighters are still based in African countries. After the failed revolt, Putin gave Wagner fighters 3 choices: go home, go to Belarus for Prigozhin, or join the Russian military. What we don't know yet is if that applies to all the Wagner troops in African countries too. We don't even know if Prigozhin will still be running things from Belarus. The Wagner Group still has contracts in Mali and the Central African Republic, and Russia's long-serving Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has told those countries that Russia would continue to provide them with security. Given the vast benefits that Russia seems to get from the Wagner Group's activities in African countries, it'll be interesting to see if and how Vladimir Putin keeps them going moving forward.